Welcome to 10-Minute Type Advice by Personality Hacker. I'm Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This show features questions from the Personality Hacker community that we answer in about 10 minutes. We've been using personality types in our coaching for years, and we'd love to answer your questions about personal growth through the lens of type. You can find out more about us at personalityhacker.com. Okay, now let's hear today's question.
Hi, I'm an ENFJ who, whenever I take a test that tests the functions, the strength of the functions, I always test much higher with my NI than my FE. No, I'm not an INFJ in disguise. I definitely relate much more closely to the profile of an ENFJ. And I'm wondering what would make that so. Why would I consistently test higher with my NI? Not by very much, but it's definitely higher than my FE. And I'm just wondering if you could answer that question for me or have some ideas as to why. And of course, I've thought of nature and nurture, but because NI is something that doesn't develop as quickly as FE, and I was definitely a very gregarious, very friendly little girl, I'm not quite certain why this is something that consistently from almost the time I first took the MBTI, I've always tested higher NI.
Thanks for the question. So as an ENFJ, you're testing higher when you go and do an assessment, a personality assessment. That introverted intuition or perspectives process seems to be coming out stronger than you would expect as an ENFJ. So is it possible that an ENFJ on assessments could type out with their second or co-pilot auxiliary cognitive function being stronger than their primary cognitive function?
Yeah, absolutely. An assessment could determine that or could come out that way. There's not a lot of online assessments that test for cognitive function specifically. I know our friend Dario Nardi's Keys to Cognition is one of them. I think there's a couple of others that I'm not sure if I have a lot of familiarity with, but I know that they exist. There are probably 3 to 5 reasons immediately that come up for me why your introverted intuition or perspectives function in an online assessment is scoring higher than your extroverted feeling or harmony. And I don't think it has anything to do with whether or not that function is actually more powerful or stronger than your dominant. It is very, very rare when somebody's auxiliary function is legitimately, like in practice, not in theory, but in practice, a function that is working as hard and at the same level of competence, skill, and consideration as a person's dominant or driver function. And the reason why is because it's not our favorite thing to do. Like, we are wired to get a little cocktail of positive chemical hits when we use our dominant function or our driver, and we don't get that same hit for our auxiliary function, though it is something that we usually enjoy using because we have a talent for it, and it helps us stretch into the better parts of who we are. So it's very, very rare when somebody's auxiliary function or co-pilot function is even at the same level of strength as their dominant or driver. And that's usually over a lifetime of skill development. Like, I've known some athletes, like ISP athletes, who are competitive, right? Like world champions. And so they were put in a context where their auxiliary cognitive function or co-pilot of extroverted sensing or sensation, from the time they were like 3 years old, it was just a perpetual, insistence on mastering that part of who they are. And they still had a preference for their dominant or driver. So even in situations like that, it's still, you're going to prefer it. It's going to be a stronger tool in your toolbox. And so I wouldn't necessarily take that information as being some sort of like gospel, right? Like, don't apply too much weight to an online assessment, no matter what information it's giving to you.
Well, and this is why she's asking the question, is because as herself, she knows herself and her cognition better than an assessment. And she's saying, I know I'm not an INFJ. I know I'm an ENFJ. So why is this assessment telling me something maybe different?
Right. So there's a couple different things. Like I said, I immediately think of 3 to 5. The first one is that all online assessments have an error rate. That's the very first thing, which is that they're just trying to do approximations, and it's not like they bequeath anything upon us. I'll take a cognition test or assessment online, and I'll get things that are kind of all over the place, but that doesn't mean that extroverted intuition isn't my dominant or driver function.
I would say that not just online assessments, all assessments, including the MBTI standard assessment, has an error rate. The paper version.
Right. And they're not even trying to, assess for cognitive functions. They're just assessing for dichotomies, which is a much easier thing to do. So that's the second thing. The second thing is that cognition or cognitive function preferences is a very difficult thing to assess for. And so not only do all assessments have an error rate, but also that one in particular is going to be more complicated. And I know I've talked to Dario, our friend, about his keys to cognition, and it's not really designed to tell you your personality type. In fact, he was very clear on that. It's designed to help you get an idea of the kind of preferences you have with your cognition, but it isn't intended to tell you your type, which means that if you're coming out with introverted intuition is stronger than extroverted feeling, his recommendation is to not, hop types now, thinking that you're leading with introverted intuition. The third thing that comes up for me is that assessment taking is an introverted space. When we sit down to take an assessment, particularly one online, it's just me and my thoughts. And so I'm going to be put into a context that's going to pull out my introverted components a little bit more than my extroverted components. And in particular, an assessment for intuitive types really has them start to ask the implications of these questions. What is this question trying to get to? What's the pattern of this particular question? It's going to kick up your introverted intuition like crazy, I would imagine. So very well maybe that the context itself is encouraging you to see more of that aspect of who you are, and therefore weigh your answers more in the direction of an introverted or introversion because you're in an introverted space. And the same thing might happen with somebody like me, right? As an ENTP, I might actually end up, making statements that I have a preference for my introverted thinking or accuracy. Well, that's because that's the context for it. My extroverted intuition needs a very different context to be really pulled upon. And I think another aspect of this is how unconscious our relationship to our dominant or driver function is. Like, we don't really know how many areas of our life it touches. We don't understand how we season every aspect of our life with that dominant or driver function. It's become so unconscious to us. It's just how we see and experience life. Whereas our relationship to our auxiliary or co-pilot is way more conscious for us. It's because it has to have been developed over time. We have to pull on it, right? Like, we have to go into a space that isn't as native to us. For you and I, it's an extroverted space. So that is our native wiring, the thing that we have a preference for. So anytime I'm using introverted thinking, that's a little bit more on my conscious awareness. And my extroverted intuition is just something that I'm bringing to the table. It's like, I might as well define it as me, Antonia Dodge. So I think when we are asked questions of our preferences, the ways in which we access our auxiliary or co-pilot function is a lot more on our radar. We see us doing that. We are aware of when we're pulling on it. We're aware of when we've had to maybe reject our 10-year-old or tertiary function and its pull. And we have stories and narratives and examples of when we've gotten into our co-pilot or auxiliary function. But we don't have all those narratives and stories for our dominant. It's just life.
So what I hear you saying, it's like a fish in water for our dominant function. When we go through the world in our driver function, it is our reality in a lot of ways. We don't really question it as much, and we're not really ruminating or thinking about it. In fact, it's the lens we think about other things through in a lot of ways. So as you ask this question as an ENFJ, you're probably thinking about your introverted intuition through the lens of extroverted feeling or harmony without even maybe knowing it all the time. Maybe there's an unconscious part of you that's always processing through this lens. And so, like you said, Antonia, on an assessment, you're not going to necessarily bring all that forward. It's just how life is. It's just how reality works for you, not necessarily something you're consciously attuned to.
Yeah. And then finally, not only is an assessment a place where we are in an introverted context or space, but I think typology itself pulls out our pattern recognition. The subject itself is going to have us filtering most of the ideas and the questions and the concepts and the theoretical, as I mentioned before, the implications. Like the topic it's a very perceiving topic, right? We get to a place where we make decisions based on the information we've taken in, but we first have to take in that information. We first have to understand and learn about ourselves. And so typology itself is going to pull on our perceiving functions, which of course intuition and introverted intuition in this context is a perceiving function. It's your preferred perceiving function. So it's not just the context of an assessment, but it's also the topic pulls on an intuitive part of you. So I could see that just the nodes in the system running, right? There's a bunch of different nodes in the system running where it would make sense. It wouldn't be for everybody. I'm not saying every ENFJ is going to take a cognition assessment and come out with their introverted intuition on top. And I'm not saying that's inevitable, but I'm saying that there might be very understandable reasons why that happened for you. Oh, sorry. I was going to say the final thing is, and just forgive me, but based on your voice, you sound like somebody who is not super young. It sounds like you have moved into a time period where you are probably very much introverted intuition. You sound more seasoned, more mature. You sound like somebody who's at a time period in your life where this is way more a part of your identity than maybe it was when you were younger. So that actually is maybe even the biggest node in the system, is how much you're identified with introverted intuition or perspectives right now, in maybe even an unusual way for your life. Because as we get older, we associate with our other functions way more intimacy than we do with our dominant, which is something that we almost turn into a set and forget at a certain point. So all of these things are, potential reasons, not the reason, but potential reasons for you to test out as an introverted using introverted intuition stronger than extroverted feeling. But my guess is that when you take the theory into the real world, when you're actually applying it to your life, you're watching yourself move through situations and circumstances, extroverted feeling or harmony is still the go-to tool in your toolbox.
Thank you so much for the question. You can ask your own question about personality types or personal growth. Visit personalityhacker.com/questions. We also have programs designed to help you with your personal growth through the lens of personality types. Again, visit personalityhacker.com and find the program that's made just for you. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Thank you for listening to 10-Minute Type Advice by Personality Hacker. We'll talk with you on the next episode. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.